So surveying and mapping, not exactly, the most thrilling topic at first glance. But trust me, this deep dive is going to be about a company that's basically using these kind of old school techniques to help build like the cities of the future.
Yeah, it's you'd be surprised how much is happening like under the radar in this field.
For real.
There's some really cool stuff going on.
We're looking at Kav Medida today, an Israeli company, and their website is, it's packed with info about like the bleeding edge of this industry. So what makes them stand out from the crowd?
Well, their tagline, that's the first thing that kind of grabbed me. AI-driven smart data analysis for smart cities and road planning.
Ooh.
This isn't your grandfather's surveying anymore,
All right.
We're talking about using data to actually design and manage how cities work.
Okay, now you've got me interested. So how did they get to this point? What's their story?
So Kav Medida was established back in 2012, and they started out doing, pretty traditional surveying and mapping. But then things got kind of interesting in 2018.
Oh.
They acquired this road and traffic planning company, had a ton of experience, over 50 years in the business.
Wow. That's a pretty big move. What was the idea behind that?
It's all about synergy, They wanted to bring together all this expertise, so surveying, design, and planning all under one roof.
Wow.
So instead of having all these separate teams that don't really talk to each other,
right,
you've got this unified approach from the very first survey all the way to the final planning stages.
Makes sense. I can see how that would, streamline things for sure. Probably avoids a lot of headaches down the line.
Absolutely.
But let's get into the nitty-gritty here. What are some of the services that they actually offer?
So their list of services is pretty extensive.
Okay.
But there are a few that really showcase how innovative they are.
Okay, like what?
For instance, they offer mobile mapping.
Mobile mapping.
Yeah, and what this means is they can actually survey roads without having to shut them down.
Wait, hold on. How does that even work?
So they use these vehicles, right? And these vehicles are decked out with these super high-tech cameras. And as they're driving, they capture incredibly detailed images.
Wow.
And then they process all those images and create these accurate 3D models of the road and the whole surrounding environment.
So no more traffic jams just because someone needs to measure a street.
Exactly.
That's a win for everyone.
Absolutely.
And what about, I saw something on their site about indoor mapping and modeling. I'm picturing Google Maps, but for, inside buildings.
Yeah, that's a good way to think about it.
Okay.
They create these precise 3D models of all kinds of buildings, like museums, hospitals, you name it, even shopping malls.
Interesting.
Imagine walking into a huge hospital for the first time and being able to instantly find your way to the right department.
Yeah. That would take a lot of stress out of the situation, especially if you're, not feeling great already.
Right.
It sounds like they're not afraid to tackle these really complex projects.
Nope.
So what about, I saw smart scenario simulations on their site. What is that?
So imagine city planners, and they can create a virtual replica of an urban environment, right?
Okay.
And then they can test out different scenarios, like changing traffic flow or the impact of new construction projects.
So it's like a simulator for a whole city?
Pretty much. It lets them make better decisions before they go and, make changes in the real world.
That's amazing, taking all the guesswork out of urban planning.
Yep.
So how do they create these simulations? This is where the whole digital twin thing comes in, right?
Exactly. So a digital twin is it's basically a virtual representation of a physical asset.
Okay.
And in this case, that asset could be a whole city or, a specific piece of infrastructure.
Yeah.
And it's not just a static model. It's constantly being updated with real-time data from all sorts of sources.
So it's like a live, constantly evolving model of the city.
Exactly.
Wow. That's got to be a ton of data. Where does it all come from?
Well, they use a lot of different sources, like those mobile mapping vehicles we talked about, sensors placed all over the city,
right,
and even drones.
Wow. So this is starting to sound less just surveying and more like some kind of high-tech operating system for an entire city.
Yeah, it is pretty amazing.
Makes you wonder, how do they even process all that information?
Well, that's where the AI-driven part of their tagline comes in.
Ah.
They've developed these really sophisticated algorithms, and those algorithms can analyze massive amounts of data, identify patterns, and actually provide useful insights for the people planning and developing the city.
So they're not just collecting the data, they're making it meaningful.
Right.
That's, that's a really important distinction. It's one thing to have all this information, but if you can't actually use it to like make things better, then it's useless.
Exactly.
So what's an example of like how they're using this data to make an actual real-world impact?
So on their website, they highlight a few areas where they're focusing their efforts.
Okay.
One that really stood out to me was this idea of supporting technological products and services that enable advanced analysis and tracking for each project.
Okay, but what does that actually look like in practice?
Well, think about like road maintenance. They can combine data from their mobile mapping with their AI-powered analysis, and they can actually pinpoint sections of road that need repair, before any major problems pop up.
That's smart.
So cities can fix things proactively. They save money, and it avoids like huge disruptions for people.
That's a great example of how they're bridging the gap between like having data and actually taking action. I'm also curious about their R&D. Like, what are they working on that might change how this whole field works in the future?
Yeah, so they've got a whole section on their website about R&D.
Okay.
And one project that I thought was really interesting was this mobile tool for point cloud collection with absolute location automation.
Okay, I'm going to need you to break that down for me. What's a point cloud and why is this a big deal?
Sure. So think of a point cloud as like a super detailed 3D representation of, a physical object or a space.
Yeah.
It's made by taking tons of measurements, like thousands, even millions of them. And it's like a digital fingerprint of, the real world.
Okay, so what about the absolute location automation? What makes that so special?
So a lot of times when you're collecting this kind of data, you're relying on GPS.
Right.
But GPS can be unreliable, especially in places where you don't have a clear view of the sky.
Like tunnels.
Exactly. Tunnels, dense urban areas, or, inside buildings. But with this new technology, they can collect like super accurate 3D data, even in those tricky locations.
So they're pushing the boundaries of where and how we can get this kind of information.
Exactly.
What are some of the implications of that?
Well, imagine being able to create like a digital twin of a subway system.
Okay.
With all the tunnels, the tracks, everything.
Wow.
Or imagine being able to map out all the pipes and cables under a city street and like down to the millimeter.
That's pretty incredible. What are some of the practical uses for being able to map these places that, were really hard to get to before?
So for the subway, you could use that digital twin to like optimize the train schedules,
Okay.
find potential safety hazards. You could even use it to simulate like emergency situations.
Interesting.
And for the underground utilities, it could help with maintenance, prevent damage during construction, even help plan for like future expansion of the city.
It's amazing what we can learn with this technology. But, with all this talk about data and sensors and AI, it's easy to forget that we're talking about real cities with real people living in them.
Yeah, that's an important point.
It brings us back to the human element of all this. If we get more and more into these advancements in like how cities are built and run, we need to make sure that the technology is serving people, not the other way around.
Absolutely. And that's something we should definitely dive into deeper.
I agree. So while this has been a really fascinating look at the tech, I think we need to shift gears a bit.
Okay.
And talk about the bigger picture. Like, what does it actually mean for people to live in these cities of the future with all these digital twins and smart sensors?
That's a great question. And it's one we're going to tackle head on in the next part of our deep dive.
Let's do it.
Welcome back. Before we, really jump into those point clouds and all that, let's circle back to some of the services Kav Medida offers, and like how they're already making a difference out there.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah.
We did get kind of deep into the technical stuff there for a minute.
Mm-hmm.
So back to the real world.
The whole mobile mapping thing, that's still blowing my mind a little. Like it's such a smart way to solve that problem.
Right. And it's more than just avoiding traffic too. Think about all the like wear and tear on the roads from, constantly having to do those surveys, especially in places where there's a lot of traffic already.
Yeah. Less disruption, less damage. Makes sense.
Exactly. So mobile mapping helps with that. Less maintenance, roads last longer. It's a sustainability thing too.
That's a good point. I hadn't even thought about that. And it's not just about roads, right? They're doing all the indoor mapping and modeling stuff too. And that to me seems like it could have even more applications. Oh, for sure. Think about any kind of large, complex structure. hospitals, universities, even those giant shopping malls, right? Having a super detailed 3D model of the space makes it so much easier to find your way around for everyone.
Yeah, I can see that. Imagine trying to find a specific department in a hospital. You're already stressed out. You don't know where you're going. That could be a nightmare.
Exactly. But with an accurate map on your phone, it's so much easier.
It's like they're bringing GPS indoors.
Exactly. And, it's not just for navigation either.
Right. What else?
These models are really valuable for planning and renovations, too. Imagine an architect is redesigning a section of that hospital, right? If they have a digital twin, they can see exactly how everything fits together. They can try out different layouts, even spot potential problems before they start any construction.
So it's like a giant interactive blueprint.
Yeah, pretty much.
Wow. And speaking of testing things out, what about those smart scenario simulations we were talking about earlier? That sounds like almost like a video game for city planners.
It kind of is. I mean, with the digital twin of a whole city, they can simulate all kinds of changes, like adding new bus routes, closing streets to traffic, even, big construction projects. And they can see what happens.
So they can actually see the impact of those decisions.
Yeah.
Before they, actually do anything.
Exactly. It takes a lot of the guesswork out of it. And that's really important as cities get more complex.
I can see that. Data-driven decision-making, right? And this all ties back to that digital twin concept. That's becoming a big deal in urban planning these days. But what does it really mean to have a digital twin of a city? It sounds kind of sci-fi, like a virtual copy of the whole thing.
It is a powerful idea. But it's important to remember it's not just a static model. It's constantly being updated with real-time data from all those sensors and mobile mapping systems we talked about.
So it's like a live breathing version of the city?
Yeah, exactly. It's always changing and adapting.
That's pretty amazing. So what can you actually do with that?
Oh, so many things. Think about monitoring traffic in real time. You can identify bottlenecks, adjust traffic lights on the fly.
To keep things moving smoothly.
Exactly. It's like having a nervous system for the whole city. And it's not just traffic either.
What else? Give me another example.
Air quality. Imagine having sensors all over the city monitoring pollution levels. You can identify hotspots, send out alerts to people, if there's a problem.
Wow. That's incredible. What about infrastructure? Could you use it for that?
Oh, absolutely. Put sensors on bridges, buildings, anything. You can detect tiny changes that might mean, something needs to be repaired. You can prevent problems before they happen.
It's like having a crystal ball for the city. You can see into the future and prevent disasters.
Pretty much. And all this relies on having, good data. And that brings us back to their R&D and that mobile point cloud collection tool.
Right. That was a pretty big deal.
Yeah, being able to capture that 3D data in places where you don't have GPS, that opens up a lot of possibilities.
It's like having X-ray vision for the city. You can see all the hidden stuff. So what can you do with that? I mean, what's the practical use for being able to map those underground spaces and stuff?
Tons of applications. Think about that subway system example. You could use that digital twin to optimize the train schedule, find potential hazards, even run simulations for emergencies.
Let's see how people would evacuate or something.
Exactly. And for the underground utilities, all the pipes and cables, you could use it to streamline maintenance, prevent damage during construction, even plan for future expansion of the system.
That level of detail is, it's pretty mind-blowing. But, with all this talk about data and sensors and AI, it's easy to forget that we're talking about, places where people live and work.
That's a good point.
It brings us back to that human element again.
Mm-hmm. We got to make sure we're not losing sight of that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So as much as I'm fascinated by all this technology, I think it's time we shift gears a bit. We need to talk about, the bigger picture. What does it actually mean for people to live in a city that's run by algorithms?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And it's one we're going to tackle in the final part of our deep dive.
All right. So welcome back to the deep dive. We've been, really digging into Kav Medida and all the work they're doing, right at the cutting edge, this whole smart city thing. And it's been fascinating, but I got to be honest, there's this one question that keeps coming back to me.
Mm-hmm.
What does all this tech and data, what does it actually mean for people who live in these cities? What's it like to actually live in one of these, cities of the future?
Yeah, that's the big question, isn't it?
Yeah.
We can talk about algorithms and sensors all day long, but at the end of the day, it's got to be about how this stuff affects people's lives.
Right. Totally. And I got to admit, like, part of me gets a little, I don't know, a little nervous about it all. Like, are we heading towards this future where cities are super efficient, but, maybe kind of cold and impersonal? Like, everything's optimized, but we've kind of lost something along the way.
I get that. It's a valid concern. But I think the key thing to remember is that, technology is just a tool.
Right.
And like any tool, it can be used in a lot of different ways,
Yeah.
It really depends on the people who are using it.
So when you're talking about a company like Kav Medida with their whole like smart data analysis for smart cities thing, what's their vision? Are they thinking about the human side of all this?
Well, if you look at their website, it's pretty clear that they're not just focused on efficiency for its own sake. They talk about creating cities that are livable and sustainable. And those words suggest that they're thinking about like people's well-being, not just, making traffic flow better or using less energy.
Okay, that's good to hear.
Yeah.
But how does that translate into like actual improvements in people's lives? Like, give me an example of how this technology can make a city, actually more livable.
Sure. Think about something as basic as like walking to work.
Okay.
Imagine a city where the sidewalks have sensors that are tracking like how many people are walking where and when.
Okay.
And then they use that data to like adjust how long the crosswalk signals stay green.
Okay.
Or to like prioritize pedestrian traffic during rush hour. They could even use it to figure out where they need to make the sidewalks wider or, do other things to make them easier to use.
So it's like instead of feeling like you're fighting against the city to get around, the city's actually adapting to you.
Exactly. It's about creating a city that feels more responsive, more intuitive, not just efficient, but like actually enjoyable to live in.
I like that. That's a great example. It's not, some crazy futuristic thing. It's just a simple improvement that could make a real difference in how people experience the city.
Right. And I think that's where the real potential of this whole smart city thing lies. It's not about like replacing human needs with algorithms. It's about using those algorithms to make the city work better for people.
Yeah, I like that. It's about making the city more human, not less.
Exactly. Think about public safety.
Okay.
Instead of just reacting to crime after it happens, imagine a network of sensors and AI that can actually help predict where crime might happen. Make the city safer for everyone.
That's interesting. But it also makes me think about, some of the potential downsides we haven't really talked about.
Like what?
Well, like privacy. If there are all these sensors collecting data about everything we do, where we go, who we talk to.
Right.
That kind of freaks me out a little. Like, who has access to all that information? What are they doing with it?
Yeah, that's a legitimate concern, and it's something we need to be really careful about. Like, there need to be strong safeguards in place to protect people's privacy.
Absolutely. Like, people need to know what data is being collected, how it's being used, and who has access to it. Transparency is key.
I agree. And it's not just about privacy either. We need to make sure that the algorithms that are running all this stuff are fair, like that they're not biased against certain groups of people.
Oh, yeah, that's a good point. We've seen how algorithms can, pick up on and even amplify human biases.
Exactly. And in this context, that could have a really big impact on people's lives, like who gets access to housing or jobs or even just, basic city services.
So it's not just about the technology itself. It's about the values that are built into it and the people who are designing and using it.
Exactly. And that's a responsibility that falls on everyone, not just companies like Kav Medida, but also city planners, policymakers, and, all of us as citizens.
Well, this has been a really thought-provoking deep dive. We started out talking about, surveying and mapping, and we ended up talking about, like, the very soul of a city.
Yeah, it's funny how that happens.
It just goes to show that even the most technical stuff can have a huge impact on, how we live our lives and the kind of world we create for ourselves.
Absolutely. And it's a conversation we need to keep having. As our cities become more and more reliant on these technologies, we need to be thinking critically about how they're being used and what kind of future we want to build.
So as we wrap up here, I'm feeling, I guess, a mix of, like, excitement and caution. The possibilities are really amazing, but we need to approach all this with, open eyes and a critical mind.
I think that's the perfect takeaway. We all need to be involved in shaping this future, asking the tough questions, and making sure that these technologies are used in a way that benefits everyone.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time.